Welcome to the Biometric Update Podcast. I'm your host, Joel McConvey. On today's episode, I speak with Hartley Thompson, the CEO of Microblink. The company has shifted its focus from document verification to the larger picture of trusted identity, as generative AI keeps making it harder to tell what's real from what's a deepfake. Here's my conversation with Microblink's Hartley Thompson. Well, thanks for joining us on the Biometric Update Podcast.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Can you start by giving our listeners just a kind of brief overview of what Microblink does? What's your core business? What are your core products? What are you trying to achieve?
Sure. So I think most of the industry has historically known Microblink as a document capture company. I would say we're no longer just a document capture company. We're now what we call the Identity Intelligence OS company. So we said for over a decade, been known for the best-in-class document capture. So for us, that foundation still matters, but today it's really table stakes, if we're being honest. So what we do now is provide a coordinated system of intelligence that allows our customers who are enterprises to control trust. So how we look at that is who or what is acting, defining authority, meaning what they're allowed to do, and then assigning liability, meaning who's responsible when things go wrong, which is obviously very important from a regulatory and liability standpoint. And we do that across the entire journey, not just for humans, but from humans to AI agents. So the way we think about it is a world where identity is no longer static and actors are no longer purely human, which is anybody that's been following agentic AI knows what I'm talking about. Enterprises really don't need more tools. So they need is an operating system for trust, and that's what Microblink has evolved into from what we were the past 10 years.
And how quickly has that had to change, given the sort of speed at which this sector is evolving?
It's had to change pretty quickly. So we started on this transition, say late 2024. 2025 was really about building the foundation of the OS that we have built. And the timing is everything, because if we had built the same platform, I would say 4 or 5 years ago, or the same OS 4 or 5 years ago, we would have probably been behind, would have had a lot of technical debt. But now we feel like we're very well positioned for what is happening right now, especially with Gen AI fraud. And then when you layer on agentic transactions as well, and KYA, which is know your agent. We call it know your actor because it's a mix of the human and the agents. But that's the evolution has been perfect timing for us.
I like that term, know your actor. It implies the human agency behind the AI agent. So that's a nice turn of phrase.
Thank you. Glad to hear it.
Let's talk about identity fraud. It's a big problem. How big is this problem?
It is massive. I mean, and the scale of it's not just the numbers of the fraud, but how fast the scale is changing. I mean, it's evolving faster than, frankly, most systems can adapt to from what we're seeing. So put some numbers behind it. Projected fraud losses just in the U.S. alone for 2027 is $40 billion. If you look back to 2023, which was just 3 years ago, it's crazy. It feels like it was 10 years ago, but just 3 years ago, that was around 12 billion in the U.S. So you do the math, you can see from 2023, 12 billion to 40 billion projected by next year. That's quite a leap. So that's not just incremental growth. I mean, that is systemic acceleration. And to be clear, I wouldn't say that's because companies all of a sudden stop caring about security and preventing fraud. It's really because the nature of fraud itself has changed.
And how so? I mean, we all know about generative AI, but what is actually driving this massive spike in fraud?
Good question. So yes, generative AI is at the core of it because fraud has shifted from no longer being manual to where it's now automated and adaptive. And you can be, frankly, not a very sophisticated or experienced fraudster and use Gen AI to do things at scale. So put some numbers behind that as well. What we're now seeing is that deepfakes are being used in roughly 1 in 4 biometric attempts. I mean, the injection attacks that we're seeing are bypassing traditional pipelines entirely. And then, like I mentioned earlier, the fraud systems are actually learning and adapting faster than static verification rules. So the uncomfortable reality of our industry is that most legacy identity systems were really designed for human fraud at human speed. But today, attackers are using AI-generated, programmatic, and continuously optimized fraud models. So reality is static checks don't fail loudly, they actually fail silently, which is why we're very excited about what we're building at Microblink to be ahead of the curve and solve some of these problems a bit deeper.
Do you think document verification and that whole sort of corner of the industry is fading out or phasing out?
That's a great question. I say that's a debate that we have a lot internally. Obviously, there's a lot of debate about it externally. I would say yes and no. It really depends on the use case and the problem that the end customer is trying to solve. So from our perspective, we're seeing a rise and an increase in demands on the document verification side. But again, it has to be paired with other signals and other defense against different fraud vectors as well. So it's kind of moved from a zero-sum game where it was, you have the best document verification, we're not going to worry about any of the other stuff because that's the gate usually to come in. Now that identity verification needs fraud prevention is more adaptive, it's a part of the stack that's still critical, but it is table stakes, like I mentioned earlier, in a lot of ways, especially if you're just doing the extraction or the scanning of the data. So the way I would describe it is you have coordinated intelligence versus brittle stacks, right? So when we look across the market, no surprise that it's full of really stitched together systems, which is why we built a coordinated one. So if you look at the market, most identity vendors, what I call them brittle stacks, I would say you have one vendor for capture, you have another vendor for liveness, another vendor for fraud signals, another vendor for orchestration. So from the outside looking in, these stitched systems look comprehensive, but for a sophisticated fraudster, they're easier to game because they don't own the signal source. And that's where I would say Microblink is fundamentally different from what we're building. So we started, 12 plus years now, we've been building on device computer vision models. So what that means, we can generate signals at the source. We understand signal provenance, which is very important. And then we can now coordinate decisions across the journey, not just in isolation. So that coordination is really what makes the system resilient because fraud, especially Gen AI fraud in the scale that's happening now, is going to exploit gaps and not really features in a stack.
Interesting. How do you find it to be a challenge to differentiate Microblink from other people who've sort of noticed the same thing and are making similar moves? How do you communicate, what's different about the company effectively to people who are faced with the choice?
That's a great question. And I would essentially double down on what I just said around if you really dig deep and do due diligence on any of the identity vendors across the industry, really look at what is their tech stack, where can they actually provide explainability into the decisions that are being made, and do they actually own the core parts of their platforms? Because at the end of the day, that is what allows us to not have the gaps and exposures that legacy systems tend to have that are just stitched together point solutions that are being orchestrated. So I can't sugarcoat that it is pretty challenging to stand out in the sea of where all companies are kind of saying the same thing. All companies are making the same promises. You've had customers that have been disenfranchised and burned by a number of vendors over the years that are living on promises. So for Microblink, our core thesis is we stand behind what we build. We know how strong our technology is. It's been proven, both on the level of us powering and enabling a lot of identity verification providers in the industry from a document capture and verification standpoint over the years. And now we've taken everything that we've learned to plug a lot of the gaps that we've seen happening for our end customers. So it's really about just beating the drum, being consistent, leading with our technology and understanding how to be adaptive and flexible to our customers' needs as they're evolving even faster now than they have before.
On the customer side, what everyone's sort of looking for is trust. That's the core product that the identity industry is ultimately offering.
Correct.
And I was reading an interview with you from last year where you sort of were encouraging people to, embrace identity providers who are, I think, not working for nefarious purposes.
Right.
But this is a major question is, so people trust banks, people trust planes, they have all these regulations. What's the point where, regulations meet innovation for trust in the identity sector? Where's that perfect kind of convergence?
That is a great question. And one of our viewpoints is, again, by being an unpopular opinion in our line of business, but we view regulation not as a constraint. I look at it as a forcing function for better architecture, right? Because at the end of the day, I mean, if you think about, for example, the EU AI Act, that framework that's coming in to play in 2026. So that to me is very encouraging and exciting. And it's helpful because we have built our products over the past, we said, 12 plus years with an architecture that actually supports a lot of where the industry is going. So when you think about an architecture that's privacy first by design, explainable by default, and then auditable without compromising user data, that's where in regular environments we can demonstrate trust, not just claim it. So it's very, very important. And then we also think about just on the ethics and privacy first side about how we architect things. But yeah, that's how we think about it from the regulation side. And one of the things that we also do very well is on-device intelligence. So that's not just about performance and a performance decision, that's also an ethical one. So when we process identity signals directly on the user's hardware and device, what that translates to from a user and ethical standpoint is sensitive data is never going to traverse networks. Raw biometrics, for example, don't sit in any centralized honeypots. We've seen stories about other players in the industry that have been hit and exposed by those. And then more importantly, users retain dignity and control and privacy, which is very, very important to me as an individual and also to our business. So as we look at Gen AI increasing the blast radius of breaches that we're seeing, on-device intelligence, I think, becomes the ethical gold standard. So for us, I say privacy isn't a policy layer. It's really an architectural property, and that's how we've built our products, and we'll continue to build them as such.
Interesting. So we're Biometric Update. Where do biometrics, what bricks do they provide in this architecture? What kind of role are they playing?
It is very, very strong. Because I would say, think about it in a world where we're getting to where you can't really believe your eyes or ears because of Gen AI. You have to trust that architecture, and a key part of that architecture is biometrics, especially as you think about the know your agent or know your actor, as we call it, workflows. Most of the high usage, high risk workflows where you're using agents, as we're seeing, one of the most critical parts of the verification, especially for high-end transactions or high-value transactions, is an on-device biometric confirmation, right? So that, to me, is really the last line of defense if you want to prevent or reduce the chances of bad transactions or risky transactions as a customer. So biometrics is very, very important. And biometrics has a wide gambit, right? You can talk about face, palm, finger, voice. So I think we're very, very bullish on biometrics in the future, especially as it ties into knowing your actor and being a full identity intelligence operating system. So very, very important.
So, you mentioned the future. So what works now is not necessarily going to work in the future. And again, we've talked about how things are changing. We have quantum computing, this threat on the horizon. How do you keep up with the rate of change as an enterprise?
It is it is a great question, and it's something that we think about a lot and discuss it internally. So the rate of change, it can be a little bit challenging from a business perspective on one hand, but from a excitement and no day is ever the same and no day is ever boring, it's very, very invigorating for our team. And our mindset is always, let's try to solve the toughest problems that are impacting our customers and what's keeping them up at night. So as things are evolving very, very fast, and that is good for us. I feel that we're actually built to respond to that very quickly. On a personal level, me being an immigrant to the US and understanding that change is always constant, and that's been, I think, one of the defining things in my life is change, and how do you react to it and adapt to it, and how do you try to be as proactive as possible in identifying what's coming next so you can move quickly on it. And as far as how identity is changing, there's a lot of ways, but I would say the existing infrastructure of digital identity and fraud prevention is really predicated on the assumption of human presence at the point of interaction. Like we talked about earlier, as we're seeing more use of agents for commerce, identity is now, what I would say is the next question isn't just who is this, but it's really who is responsible. So the AI agents, estimated, I think, 15 trillion in B2B commerce is what AI agents are going to begin mediating over the next 12 to 18 months. So really, identity fundamentally changes. I think the critical question again becomes, has this human verified the scope, authority, and liability of this agent? So that's where our eyes are. We're very bullish on that taking shape and how we can be well positioned to, whether it's a human, whether it's an agent, whether it's a human authorizing an agent, how can we help our customers really feel secure and safe and establish that trust in this new world of identity verification for transactional purposes.
So, if we were to talk in, let's say, a year and a half, where do you think Microblink would be? Do you think all this stuff is going to play out the way everyone expects it to? Do you foresee any hurdles or weird pivots? What's coming?
Yeah, that's another great question. And I would say a year from now, I think a lot is going to change. But I think our fundamental strategy and vision of where we see identity verification going, I don't think it's going to change that much. So a year from now, if you look back and we talk again, what I would love to say is that what's been proven is that identity used to really be just about verification. Now it's actually about governance, and that Microblink is recognized as the operating system that has helped to make trust scalable in a world of humans and machines. Because, again, when you can't believe your eyes or believe your ears, because of Gen AI and the fraud that's happening, at the core, you have to really trust the architecture. So what I hope for us, and I'm very bullish and confident, is that the operating system that we've built will play a part in making trust programmable, scalable, and absolute. But we might talk a year from now and agents might not even be a thing anymore and it might be on to the next. I don't think so, but that's how we currently do it.
Fair enough, yeah. I have one more question for you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So I think I read, and you mentioned you come from, is it a Bahamian background?
The Bahamas, yes. Yeah. Yep, I'm Bahamian.
So, does that perspective, do you find coming from a place that presumably doesn't, yield hundreds and hundreds of tech leaders?
Yeah, so we're a small but mighty country. We're not a lot of tech leaders.
Yeah, does that give you a different perspective on the industry, on the sort of the way it's functioning in the States internationally? What does that bring to your perspective on this job?
It's a great question. I think it has shaped me a lot. I mean, going back to what I said earlier about change and kind of recreating, that's one part of it. But also, if you think about identity, it's something that touches every single human on earth. It's something that we have to verify our identities to establish trust in a number of different situations globally. And I like to think of myself as a global citizen, having traveled to lots of countries, both for business and personal. And what I really, really love about the industry that we're in is I look at it like, yes, on one hand, we're stopping fraudsters, we're protecting assets, we're doing all of that. But the part that wakes me up and what I'm fired about every day is how are we making the world a little bit safer and establishing more trust that is as frictionless as possible for an individual, no matter what country they're a citizen of, where they are located, what their beliefs are. That is what I love about identity verification. It is one of the things that connects everybody globally. So yes, I don't really think about the world as, all right, we have to solve this problem in this region. I think about if we're solving a problem, how can we solve a problem on as big of a global scale as possible?
Well, I tell you what, Hartley, I'd trust you.
Thank you, Joel. I appreciate that.
And that sort of brings me to the end of my questions. So thank you again for joining us on the Biometric Update Podcast. It's been awesome to chat.
Welcome.
And I really do appreciate your perspective and your frankness. It's not often you hear someone talk about dignity in one of these interviews. So
thanks, Joel. I appreciate you. Thanks for having me. This was fun, and looking forward to talking to you again a year from now, and we'll see how this all ages.
That's right.
We're very, very bullish, very optimistic on what we've built and what we're continuing to build to solve these problems for our customers.
Thanks again to Hartley Thompson from Microblink. You can check out their website at microblink.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it. And be sure to check out all the latest biometrics and digital ID news at biometricupdate.com.